The market is more demanding than ever. Deadlines are tighter. Budgets are thinner. Expectations are higher. This is not the era of task managers. This is the era of project leaders. Strategy means nothing without execution, and execution collapses without leadership. So the question is not whether projects matter. The question is whether you're equipped to lead them. Welcome to Project Management Masterclass, where we sharpen the mindset, frameworks, and discipline required to turn strategy into measurable results.
Hello, everyone. It's your host, Brittany Wilkins. Welcome back to another episode of Project Management Masterclass. It was in episode 28. I discussed the 5 reasons why change management is necessary for successful projects. So I'm going to recap those 5 reasons very quickly to kind of help level set the context for today's show. In that episode, we said we change for a reason. And more importantly, organizations don't change. Individuals do. Organizational outcomes are nothing more than the collective result of individual change. And if this is true, then project success is not just about timelines, deliverables, or execution plans. It's about whether people are actually changing. We also talked about how frameworks can help guide the people side of change. So organizations are not just implementing change, but actually getting the benefits from the change and realizing those benefits from the change. But here's a question for you. If organizations only change when individuals do, how does individual change actually happen? How do we make and how do we initiate this change? Because this is where many initiatives break down. It's not in the strategy, it's not in the planning, but in that transition from intention to behavior. And that's where the change management framework comes into play. Now, this framework was developed by Proxy. It's one of the most widely used frameworks for guiding individual change, and that is the ADKAR model. So today, I'm going to break down this model, how it works, and why it remains one of the most practical tools for understanding the human side of change. I'm going to begin by going through the first stage, which is awareness. And within this stage, awareness means individuals have an understanding why the change is happening. Not just what is changing, but why the organization needs to change in the first place. Essentially, in this stage, you would like to have answers to questions like, what problem is being solved? What opportunity is the organization pursuing? What risk exists if the organization does nothing? Without awareness, change just kind of feels arbitrary. And when change feels this way, that's when resistance begins almost immediately. And you see, people begin to question the motive behind the change. And you also have to know, as we're going through a change or coming out of a change, many people may ask the question, why are we doing this now? Or what is next? What is wrong with the current process? And what does this mean for the future process? Is leadership solving a real problem or just introducing something new? So awareness answers these questions. And what this stage is about is providing clarity and context. And when people understand the reason for change, uncertainty begins to decrease. And that's where the journey of individual change begins. But awareness alone is not enough. because understanding a change, it does not mean people will necessarily be on board at first or really support it. So that leads us to the next stage. After awareness, once individuals understand that need for change, then there is the desire stage. And when you're in this stage of desire, people are asking questions like, do I personally want to support this change? And this stage is often misunderstood. Understanding the need for change, it does not automatically mean individuals want to participate in it. You have to realize is that people evaluate change through a personal lens first. And they may begin to wonder and question, how will this change affect my role? Will I still be successful in this new environment? Will this increase my workload? Will it reduce my influence? Will I have any influence with this change? Desire develops when individuals believe the change will benefit them, their team, or the organization they care about. So essentially, this is about what's in it for me. And this is where the trust in leadership, it definitely plays a significant role within this stage. If trust is really strong, people are willing to support that change. But if trust is weak, even well-designed change initiatives, they can really struggle to make any real progress. And I want to be real with you guys for a minute and, share a personal story of kind of going through a change transformation. It was early in my career. I worked in the industrial coatings industry at a plant that manufactured powder paint. And this facility, it had been a small family-run operation before being acquired by a larger company. And corporate made the decision to implement a single ERP system across all plants. Now, anyone who's been involved with ERP systems know ERP system implementation is really not for the faint of heart. It is a huge endeavor and undertaking. And the reason why corporate was making this decision was visibility, standardization, and essentially control. On paper, it makes perfect sense, right? But inside the plant, it was a totally different reality. This was a pretty much productive operation I worked within. It wasn't really modern. There were no documented processes, no SOPs. The entire operation ran on tribal knowledge. People knew what to do because they've always done it that way. And around the same time, I was working to introduce more structure to support the tribal knowledge and to begin to document the knowledge that was running the operation and developing standards, building consistency, and trying to really shift the culture. And right in the middle of this effort, that's when the ERP implementation hit. Corporate teams started showing up. They started asking questions, requesting data, pushing for system adoption, and resistance showed up immediately. And it wasn't because people didn't understand the change. They understood it. They just didn't want it because from their perspective at the time, many of them felt it was more work, more complexity, and really a disruption to a system that really already worked. And on top of that, production still had to continue. We still had to really get product. Not really, we did have to get product out of the door. So now the plant was being asked to maintain output, learn a new system, and adapt to new expectations all at the same time. And that's a lot. That was a lot to deal with back when I was in it. And it felt like overload. And the resistance wasn't isolated. This was happening across multiple plants. And it became disruptive I remember we were having a workshop that was meant to focus on something completely different. And the ERP conversation, it really just took over the entire session. It became like a venting session about this ERP system, how painful it is, how it's really causing disruption, how it's going to eventually cause more harm than help in the beginning. There was just a lot of discussions revolving around the ERP system that the objective of the whole meeting got derailed, and it just continued. And I just kind of sat there just shaking my head, and it escalated to the point where HR had to step in and really kind of talk to the people. She expressed her concerns and kind of understanding, and adapting to change, being part of a larger corporate corporation and having to implement a new way, new standards, and new ways of working. But as I sat there and thought about it, and as I look back on it, this is where most organizations have some lessons to learn. Oftentimes we focus on the system, we focus on the process, and we focus on that rollout plan, but we ignore the human condition inside the system, the people. So from an execution standpoint, this is what friction looks like. It's the people friction. People are always being asked to move, but they never were really led to want the movement. Kind of just hit them all at once, and that could be like a lot to take in. So the organization keeps pushing forward while the people inside it are pulling back. And that tension, it shows up in many different ways, such as delays, rework, misalignment, and resistance that leaders often mislabel as performance issues. But is it really a performance issue, or is it a desire gap? So here's the question we have to ask ourselves as leaders leading and facilitating change. Are people resisting the change, or have we failed to give them the reason to want it? Desire creates movement, but without that direction, the movement can really not move or go anywhere. Which brings me to the next stage, is knowledge. Once we understand the need for change and have the desire to support it, then knowledge begins to answer the question, how do I change? This stage focuses on providing individuals with information and the guidance needed to really adopt new behaviors. And so where does this knowledge come from as we going through this change transformation? It could come from your training programs, documentation, the process guides, workshops, mentoring, coaching. But often too, what you see is that organizations invest a lot of effort in training, which is very important. But does knowledge always guarantee a successful change? And when I go back to the ERP implementation, this is where many organizations overcorrect. They invest in these trainings, documentation, workshops, assuming that knowledge will solve it. But if the desire was never established, training really just becomes noise. Because knowing something intellectually is not the same as being able to perform it consistently, which leads to the next stage in the framework, change management framework module, is ability. In this stage is individuals have to have the ability and demonstrate they can perform the new behavior in their daily work. Knowledge provides that instruction, but it's really the ability that reflects the execution. So you have someone who may understand how a new system works after attending a training, but until they really use the system repeatedly in their daily workflow, their ability remains limited. Now, they say knowledge is power. Well, applied knowledge is power. And you can only really develop the ability through practice. And then this is what essentially that develops that experience. And through that experience, that's where you get the feedback and the support. So here as leaders, we play an important role during this stage by ensuring individuals have the time, the resources, and that coaching necessary to build confidence with new behaviors. It's even the same in the ERP rollout. I mean, we could see the gap clearly. People may have attended to training, but that didn't mean that they could execute it confidently in their day-to-day work yet. Some things do take time, but it is understood that we have to perform while transforming as well. But the things we have to understand is that without ability, that the knowledge just remains theoretical. And we really know nothing in theory. Theoretical change does not necessarily produce results. But as we apply the knowledge, as we build the ability, we need something, we need the foundation, something within our foundation to sustain it. And that is really the final stage of the framework model is reinforcement. It ensures that within this stage, the change becomes permanent. Without reinforcement, people will often revert back to familiar behaviors or familiar ways of working if there's no kind of checks and balances to ensure how the new behavior, how the new system process is working. And this happens frequently when organizations move quickly from one initiative to the next, and we really haven't stabilized the previous change. And this reinforcement can take many forms. It may include recognition for adopting new behaviors. It may include performance metrics aligned with the new process. It may include leadership consistently modeling the expected behavior. But without that reinforcement, people who adapted the ERP rollout would eventually drift back into kind of some of the old habits because the system they trusted before never truly kind of went away. Sometimes you kind of working in a hybrid scenario, but as you begin to kind of work your way out of it and really establish that reinforcement, it signals the new way of working is not just temporary, but it is now really truly the standard. So why does the ADKAR model, why does it matter? When you step back and look at this model, it provides a structured way to understand the human side of change. It reminds leaders that successful change is not simply about launching a project or initiative. That's what generates excitement. That's what can initiate the awareness stage. But it's about guiding individuals through a series of transitions through awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, reinforcement. So when we understand where individuals are within this journey, then we can work to really provide that right support at the right time. That is what dramatically increases the chances of successful change. So as I walk through that model or framework, if you have not necessarily leveraged this framework within your own project environment, do you see this framework as a practical framework to implement? Where do you think you may get stuck or the organization may get stuck or hung up within the different stages, within the 5 stages? Or maybe you utilized another change management framework because there's many ways to transform. This is a particular framework, but other frameworks can be leveraged. So if you've leveraged other frameworks, how does that compare in comparison to the ADKAR model? Or if you're going into a big change initiative, have you considered the people side of change and how this may integrate or intersect into the business side of change? Or if you're coming out of a major transformation, has this framework or model enabled you to kind of look back and reflect on, here's what went well, here's what could have done better, and here's what is missing? As I stated before, in episode 28, I really wanted to explore why change management is necessary, because as project leaders, we're in a constant state of change. But then today, in today's show, I wanted to explore how individual change can actually happen, how you begin to at least initiate it to give you a starting point through awareness, desire knowledge, the ability to change, and having that reinforcement, having that foundational sustainability. And these stages remind us that organizational transformation is ultimately, it really is a human process. Keeping in mind this most important point, organizations don't change. Organizations change when people do. But here's where many organizations still kind of get it wrong. They treat the people side of change and the business side of change as separate efforts. And these have to be synced and working in parallel together. One team focuses on systems, timelines, deliverables. Another focuses on communication and training. But if these don't run in parallel, without that real alignment, that's where you begin to have the breakdowns, because change is not two separate tracks. It truly is one integrated system. The business side defines what needs to change, and the people side determines whether the change actually sticks. And if these two are not working together in real time, this is where you begin to have that organizational friction within itself. And it may manifest itself in one area. It may start with this is the people side of change. It may start with people friction, but then it could spill over into tool friction, process friction. And that's when execution slows down, adoption can become weak or not even adopted at all. And then we will fall short on expectations and not reaching really our definition of project success in our project and business environments. So as you think about changes you are leading, again, I encourage you, do people understand the change? And do they want to support it? Also ask, are we aligning how we deliver change and how people actually experience it? Because successful transformation, it doesn't happen when systems change in isolation. And it truly is a process. We may not have it all figured out, but I truly believe starting with the why, having clarity on the why would help, and then being agile and evolving over time. And this truly happens when the people and the business side move forward together.
Execution separates professionals from leaders. Stay disciplined, stay intentional, stay sharp. This is Project Management Masterclass.